Good morning and welcome back to Pick Up the Pieces. I am Stacy and we are in the pickup kitchen this morning. We are going to make a nice dinner tonight. The weather is still freezing and it is still snowing, and so we figured some more comfort food would be a good plan. So tonight we're going to have ribs and we are going to cook them in the oven. We used to have a smoker, an electric smoker. We used to smoke like ribs or brisket or whatever outside, but it broke and we haven't gotten a new one yet. And it's also just really too cold outside to be going outside and grilling or whatever. So I'm going to show you how to cook pork spare ribs or baby back ribs in your oven, in your kitchen. And along with that, we're going to have coleslaw, cornbread, and some roasted potatoes. And then maybe if we're feeling really ambitious, we'll do some dessert or something like that. So I want to get these ribs rubbed with some seasonings. Now you can do this the night before and then they can sit overnight in your fridge and have all these seasonings on them, or you can do it the morning of and then just wait a couple hours and then cook your ribs. So I have a whole rack of pork ribs here that we had in the freezer, and I had cut it in half when I froze it so that I could get it in the bag. And I am just putting this in a baking dish, and in the baking dish I put like 2 metal trivets, and I'm doing that so that I can keep the pork off the bottom of the pan, because I'm going to add either apple juice or beer to the bottom of this and cover it when I cook them. So I don't want the ribs sitting in the liquid, because I want the rib marinade to stay on the ribs and then for them to sort of steam in the oven. So I'm going to get our marinade together. So I keep calling this a marinade, but it's really more like a dry rub. And so I have 2 seasonings that we like. I have McCormick Grill Mate Mesquite, and then I have McCormick Grill Mate brown sugar bourbon. And we like these, and we like them mixed together. So separately we don't love them, but like combined they're really delicious. So I take about a half a cup. And on this one, this Mesquite one's a little bit spicy, so I go a little bit less than half a cup on that. And then the brown sugar bourbon is a little sweeter, so I go a little bit more, so like a heaping half a cup of that one. And I put that in a bowl, and then I just kind of mix this together, and then I use this to rub on the pork. And so all I'm going to do then is just really put a nice thick coating of this seasoning on the ribs. And it's going to seem kind of like a lot or a little excessive, but you really want like a good crust on the surface of these ribs. And so I'm going to get that top layer on, and I'm just going to give it a second to start to adhere to the actual rib itself. If you give it a few minutes and you let sort of the moisture from the ribs combine with the seasoning, it will stick to the ribs really well. And then when you go to flip it over and put seasoning on the other side, it won't just all fall off. So I'm going to be patient with this step. And these ribs are defrosted. We defrosted them on the counter for a little while yesterday and then in the fridge overnight, so that today then they could just marinate. And like I said, if you want to do this the night before and then just put them like in a Ziploc bag or in, you know, a container wrapped with saran in your fridge overnight to marinate overnight, you can absolutely do that. That comes out great. You can also do this with chicken. That would be tasty as well. So I'm going to give this a second to adhere, and then I'm going to flip it over and do the other side. I flipped these ribs onto a tray because I didn't want to get a ton of this rub in the bottom of the roasting pan. So now I can make sure that this rub sticks to the ribs and it just doesn't get all into the bottom of that pan. Any kind of rub that gets stuck in the bottom of that pan isn't going to really do much to flavor the meat. So that's kind of why I want to make sure that it's going to stick to the meat and it's not just going to get into the bottom of that pan. Now, when we cook this meat, we're going to cover it and cook it slow and low in the oven for several hours. Then we'll uncover it, and then if it's not caramelized on the surface, I'll just kind of broil it in the oven for a few minutes. We do not put barbecue sauce on the meat and then put it back in the oven or back on the grill, because not all of us in this house like sauce. So we'll serve the barbecue sauce on the side. But to finish this, you can absolutely baste it with a little bit of barbecue sauce and either put it on your grill for a few minutes, or you can put it back under your broiler or in your oven for a few minutes. So I am just going to make sure that this adheres to my meat, and what I'll do also is kind of get the sides coated, and it's okay if any of this falls off on your tray because we're just going to smush it back onto the meat, and it won't get wasted, and we will get like a really nice crust on our ribs. So it looks like a lot of this came off and it's on the pan, but that's fine because we're going to get it right back on that meat. And then we'll get it back into this pan. And then, again, just put it right back on there. And then right back in the pan. And I have found that if I under season, if I don't put a lot of this rub on the meat, it just doesn't taste as good because really the seasoning ends up kind of melting into the meat, and you really just want like really aggressively seasoned barbecue. Like it's not going to be as good if it's under seasoned. So we're going to let this sit on the counter for a couple of hours. We're going to let this really like soak and marinate, and I will also show you how we make our sides. Our pork ribs have marinated now for about 2 hours or so, and we're going to get these in the oven. We're going to cook them at 300 degrees for probably about 3 hours, and they will be amazing and tender and delicious. And we are going to pour a beer in with our ribs. Now, you guys have seen me make things with beer or other kinds of alcohol, and I always say that if you do not drink alcohol, it is absolutely fine to substitute non-alcoholic things in their place. If you do not drink beer or you don't have beer in your household, you could absolutely use apple juice. Apple juice would be delicious and infuse a lot of really good flavor under the ribs. You could certainly use water or maybe some chicken stock, but again, alcohol is not absolutely required in this recipe. You don't want to use wine. That would taste weird with barbecue. Now, if you wanted to add smoky flavor to this, you know, we're not smoking outside in a smoker. We're not going to be adding wood chips. You can do a lot of things to add smoky flavor. One thing you can do is add cumin. Another thing would be smoked paprika. The other thing is liquid smoke. It is literally a liquid seasoning that basically tastes and smells like smoke. And you could add that in, just kind of drizzle a little into the bottom of the liquid or add some to the meat before you add the rub. And so I am going to just cover this tightly with foil. We've got our oven preheated to 300 degrees, and this is going in, and then I'm going to make our side dishes. So our ribs went into the oven at 300 degrees. They're going to cook low and slow for about 3 hours, and they're going to be delicious. Now, we're going to get some cornbread in the oven. We're also going to make some coleslaw and let that sit in the fridge. The longer the coleslaw sits, the more delicious it will be. It's good if you do it overnight. I prefer to do it a couple of hours before we eat. So we're going to eat in about 3 hours, and 3 hours is a perfect amount of time for the coleslaw to sit and let sort of all the flavors combine. And then we've got some potatoes here that we're going to roast in the oven. These are potatoes that I got in the produce department at my grocery store. They're called like Little Potato Company potatoes. I have all this delicious seasoning that came with the potatoes, and I'm just going to drizzle some nice olive oil over these potatoes. And then these aren't going to need to cook for very long. I would say maybe 15 or 20 minutes at 375 or 400 is plenty of time. And so I am going to get these seasoned and ready to go. And then when I know that our ribs are almost done, then I'll just get these in the oven. And so I'm going to add this seasoning to the potatoes and just kind of give them a little jiggle. And now they're coated perfectly with seasoning and perfectly with oil. And then these are set aside and ready to go for later. Now I've already sprayed this with some cooking spray. And I am going to make some cornbread. Now, we love homemade cornbread. It's great. But I have found that this Krusteaz honey cornbread and muffin mix is delicious. It is so good, and there isn't a single batch of homemade cornbread that I have ever made that tastes as good as this. So I know that a lot of my videos include like homemade or from scratch recipes, but you know, the thing is when we find a recipe that we love and it's delicious and it comes out great every time, we tend to stick with it. And that's even if it does come from a mix. There's nothing wrong with using a mix if you want. So I've got a huge package of this, so I'm just going to use one package, and I buy this in bulk at BJ's or any local warehouse, like Costco would probably have it as well. And then the instructions are right on the back of the package. So oven is already preheated at 375, and I am going to cook it in a square pan, which means I need 2/3 of a cup of milk. And then I've got 1 egg. And I've got some butter that I melted in the microwave that I will combine with this. So I'm using my Danish whisk, and handsome husband is passing me my butter because he is amazing. And so I've got my Danish whisk, which does a great job of combining ingredients very quickly and easily. And I find a regular whisk, your ingredients will stick to and get like stuck in the balloon part of the whisk. But with this Danish whisk, especially if you're making like bread or brownie mix or cookie mix, it doesn't do that. So I am going to add that. And then I'm going to add in, I think it was 1/3 of a cup of melted butter. And I'll just grab a spatula here. Get all of the butter in here. And I'm just going to mix this around. Now, when you make your cornbread at home, you can add in some mix-ins. You could add in a handful of cheddar cheese. You could add in some corn. If you have like leftover canned corn that you made for a meal and you just got like a little bit left and you want to use it up, you could put that in here. You could add some chopped up jalapenos if you'd like to. There's lots of things that you can add to a mixed bread like cornbread that would make it even better. Also, like with brownies, I will add things like a handful of chocolate chips or a handful of butterscotch chips to my brownies to make it a little bit more homemade tasting. So that is something that you can do. We're going to enjoy our cornbread plain today, but like I said, you can mix in even a can of those drained green chilies. You could add those and that would be fantastic. So I'm just going to get all my cornbread out of my bowl. So even though this recipe takes a little while, meaning that you rub the ribs in and you let them sit for a while and then you bake them for 3 hours, the rest of these sides are really quick. So seems like a complicated meal. It seems like you're making a lot of things, but everything is really fast. So this is great to do because it's a nice, warm, comforting meal. We are trying to use up things that we have in our freezer. We had those pork ribs sitting in our freezer, and so that is why we're making them, because they were in there and we wanted to use them up. But you can use what you have on hand to make a great meal, and you don't have to be in the kitchen for 10 hours. So I'm going to put this bread in the oven, and then I'm going to show you how to make coleslaw. So my coleslaw recipe is a copycat Chick-fil-A coleslaw recipe that I found on the internet a while ago, and it is awesome. And so like I said, I find a recipe that I love and I stick with it, and that is what we're doing today. So I need a cup of mayonnaise, and I'm just going to eyeball that because I don't want to get a measuring cup dirty. To measure mayonnaise, good enough. And I prefer Hellmann's mayonnaise. If I had Duke's, I would use that. I personally prefer Hellmann's or Duke's. Other people in the household like their Miracle Whip or whatever, but I prefer Hellmann's, and so that is what's going into dinner tonight. Now, this will get a tablespoon plus a teaspoon of vinegar. Now, the recipe that I found online just calls for white vinegar, but I prefer to use apple cider vinegar, and I do that because I feel like it just tastes better. It's more flavorful. And so we're going to do a tablespoon of that plus a teaspoon. Okay, and then we are going to add I guess, seasonings, you would say. So dry mustard, we need a 1/4 teaspoon of this. And dry mustard adds a really good flavor. So do not skip on the dry mustard. Definitely use it if you have it. If you don't have it, then just add a little squirt of Dijon mustard, so maybe like a teaspoon of Dijon mustard or yellow mustard would be fine if you don't have the dry mustard. I'm going to do a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and I sometimes add a little extra salt later on when I taste this if it doesn't taste salty enough to me. I feel like sometimes you need a little more salt in coleslaw, but I will try it later and make that decision then. Also, I need a 1/4 cup of sugar. So I have that right here, and we are just going to mix these ingredients together in the bowl. And I'm using a huge bowl because I have 2 bags of coleslaw mix that are going to go in there. I like to use a bowl with a lid because once I get this mixed together and I put the coleslaw in, I like to just put the lid on and shake it. That is the easiest way to mix it. And while this is hanging out in the fridge for the next 3 or so hours, while our meat is cooking, I'll go in there every, hour or so and just kind of give it a shake to mix it all around. So I'm just getting that sugar mixed in with the other dressing ingredients. And that sugar will slowly dissolve as it sits in the fridge with the rest of the ingredients. So here we go. I'm going to get 1 bag of cabbage or coleslaw mix in there. Now you could buy a head of cabbage and chop that up, and you could buy some carrots and chop that up, maybe a little bit of purple cabbage if you want. You could also add a little bit of purple onion if you'd like. I really enjoy using the store-bought cabbage because it's just a lot less work. And I feel like it's not that expensive, especially if you can get it on sale. And sometimes you can get a really big bag of it at like BJ's or Restaurant Depot or Sam's Club or something like that. And then when you can get a big package of it, you are saving because you're paying less per pound. So like I said, I'm just going to mix my dressing in. And then I will take my spatula. Well, that spatula has cornbread on it. So we'll get a new spatula. I'm just going to get whatever ingredients might have ended up on the lid off the lid and give this a little bit of a mix by hand. And right now, you will see that this really doesn't look like there's enough dressing, but there definitely is. This is why when you make your coleslaw, you want to park it in the fridge for a little while, because right now, if you went to eat it, it would not be as good as if you wait a couple hours and eat it later. So we're going to get this in the fridge, and then I will show you what our pork ribs look like when they're done cooking. Our dinner has now finished cooking. We've got our cornbread, and I've cut that into pieces. We've got that ready to go. Our coleslaw looks amazing. It sat in the fridge for a while, and when that happens with coleslaw, like, the cabbage releases some of its liquids, I guess, and the dressing really coats the coleslaw really well. Our ribs are finished cooking. They cooked at 300 degrees for 3 hours, and then I uncovered them and I put them under the broiler for about 5 minutes just to get the top nice and charred. And I'm going to grab some pork for myself here, and as you can see, they're just falling off the bone, so that is wonderful. And we also made an almond pound cake. It was just from like a box mix, nothing fancy, but I kind of wanted something a little sweet to go with this meal for dessert. The cornbread is a little bit sweet because it's a honey cornbread, but I wanted something a little extra, and my dad had his surgery a couple days ago, so we're going to share some of that with them, and I'm going to go head to their house soon with dinner as well. So let me serve myself some potatoes here. I'll get a little piece of cornbread. I'm going to give myself some coleslaw. Then I'll give this a taste and let you know how it came out. And then we're going to enjoy our supper. But this smells and looks amazing. And like I said, we're not big put barbecue sauce on your meat kind of people in this house. 2 of us like it that way and 2 of us don't. So I'm keeping the sauce on the side, and there is some barbecue sauce just store-bought in the bottle at the table for when we eat. But I'm just going to give this a taste. Oh, the meat is so good. It's so tender. The seasoning is perfect. And steaming it with the beer made it very, very tender. And then I'm just going to try some coleslaw here. I love this recipe because it's tangy, it's creamy, it's a little sweet, and when you let it sit in the fridge for a couple of hours, the flavors all blend together perfectly. I don't even add any pepper to it, just the little bit of salt that it called for, and that was perfect. So we're going to sit down and enjoy our dinner. I just want to thank you so much for joining us here in the Pickup Kitchen. I am appreciative that you are here and that you watch my videos and that you're enjoying them. And so I just want to say thank you and have a great night.